Over time, we are seeing more and more reports internally, not only from within Fox News, but externally from different corporations, from different parts of the government, internal, external reports that Fox News, the conservative cable news media legacy outlet, they're not actually reporting conservative news. Now, let me extrapolate a little bit. We have all these different legacy media companies. We have MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CNN, and we have Fox News. Now, if everyone looks at, if they turn on their TV and they look at these news channels, there's only one that is conservative, Fox News. All of the other ones are, and even if you're a Democrat, even if you're a liberal, even if you're a libertarian, you would still identify Fox News as being different than all of the other news channels. Why? Because you're seeing it as they're presenting a different perspective, different from all the other 4, 5, 6 different news channels. Fox News, typically for their demographic, which is a much older demographic now, they are allegedly reporting conservative news. What this means is they are using certain foundational ideas, certain foundational concepts to perpetrate the news, current events, to their audience. What we're seeing, what we're hearing about, all the information that we're receiving, the circumstantial evidence, is that Fox News internally, they are purposely discriminating against which current events, which topics they're going to report on, and which topics they're not going to talk about at all. Now, if you compare Fox News to all of the other media outlets, the more left that these other media outlets go, the more left that Fox News goes. So if you're comparing them, yeah, Fox News has a right slant to it, but they're still moving left with all the other media organizations or media companies. They're not actually staying where they're at, where they're supposed to be from a libertarian conservative point of view, staying still there, while all the other media organizations are moving further left. They're moving left with the other media organizations. So they're not presenting certain topics that are actually real problems in America. They may mention things like, okay, there's some inflation, X, Y, and Z, and it's this president's fault, but they're not going deeper than that. And you have a lot of talking heads on Fox News, and they're doing the same thing that CNN does. They're doing the same thing that MSNBC does, but they just have a slightly right tilt comparative to all of the other media organizations. They're not actually on the right. A lot of people are searching for their news, their information online. They're trying to find different independent creators, some in their teens, some in their 20s, some in their 30s, some in their 40s. There's a lot of podcasts out there. Of course, you have to sift through all the information. That's a difficult task because you have to know what to filter, and you have to go through a lot of content to determine, okay, this is good, this is bad, whatever. You have to be discerning about what you're viewing. You have to spend time doing it. There's effort involved. A lot of people are not going to use that energy. They're going to resort to being lazy and just hearing a talking head for 15 minutes on the news channel that they can just turn on really quickly instead of finding all these different people, these different creators on different online platforms. But that is a solution to what people are saying. A lot of people are waking up and saying Fox News is towing the line. They're really fence sitters for many different reasons. They may acknowledge that they don't have all the leverage in the media institution space, and so because they have less leverage, they have to adopt the worldview that is slowly moving left. So as the world moves more left in terms of content and media and ideology, they also have to move left if they want to have a business model. There are also allegedly a lot of people within Fox News who are on the left. So of course they have a leftist ideology. They're in Fox News. They've infiltrated Fox News. We know Rupert Murdoch, he's the head of Fox News. He owns it. He's older now. He may have compromised his ideology for the sake of, well, we don't know. We don't know what's happening truly behind the scenes. But internally at Fox News, if you have people who have infiltrated Fox News and they're slowly moving to the left with all the other media organizations, that explains a lot. Fox News may also acknowledge that in order for them to be in business, because you have the FCC who's regulating what is being streamed on TV, and the FCC is controlled by the federal government, which is unconstitutional. You can't have the FCC regulate cable because every station has a right to freely speak. And then if you have kids, you would have to monitor what they're watching, of course, but you should be doing that anyways. But you may have other entities who have leverage against Fox News, and Fox News is they're a big company, but they don't have as much pull as the other media organizations collectively, right? So these federal institutions, in tandem with these other media institutions, have a lot of pull and push against what Fox News should or should not be doing. And so when Fox News goes to the reporters, I will say, Fox News, Yeah, they use teleprompters and all that as well, but there are some hosts on Fox News who have a little bit more of a destructured show. Now, there's still a structure to it, but it's destructured in the sense that they're not saying everything line by line written down, right? They're actually using some thought. It's not as improvised as you would be on a podcast. On a podcast, or maybe you have notes, but you're really speaking for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours even, and you're saying what's on your mind. You have to live, eat, and breathe what you're talking about to come off as coherent and as intelligent, or to actually formulate proper ideas and concepts to other folks that you're conversing with. On cable news, you don't really get that. Everything is scripted and structured, but I will say it is a little bit less structured depending on the hosts at Fox News. But even these hosts, when they want to do their own segments, the people at the top, the producers, they're telling these reporters, nope, you can't talk about this, you can't talk about that, you can only talk about X, Y, and Z. This is what we want to cover. They may even have agendas seasonally. This is what we want to cover for the next 2 months. This is what we want to cover for the next 2 weeks. And so you have reporters who have to succumb to that, and they have to submit to, okay, well, I'm getting paid 60, 70, 80K here. These are my bosses. I have to do this. They have no alternative. They have no other means of reporting what they want to report on. And so that's why we see that Fox News, if you look at, if some breaking news happens, we turn on all the media organizations, all the media companies on cable news. Fox News is going to be very similar to all of the other media outlets. It's not too much different. And so we have to recognize that even people who are conservative, who think that they are free thinkers, when they turn on Fox News, you're still getting propaganda. You're still getting mis and disinformation. You're still getting, not all the time, of course. I will say that in many cases, Fox News does better reporting slightly when it comes to breaking and current events compared to the other news channels. I mean, for breaking events, you hear what the headline is, you hear what the story is. For example, I have BBC. I know BBC is propagandist by the British government, but for breaking news, I see something, okay, BBC reports on it. Even with headlines, they could be misleading you. But the vast majority of the population, they're going to read a headline, oh, that's an event that happened, it's realistic, it's the BBC, it's true. They're looking at the BBC as an authority figure. I can identify and discern this is not true, this is true, whatever. But generally, to keep up with headlines, that's what I use personally. So if you're just tuning in for that and you have decent discernment, okay. When you're going into deeper conversations, deeper topics, that's when it gets tricky, because you're not really getting the right information, the right perspectives from Fox or from any other outlets on TV. Even on online platforms, there are people who are subsidized by certain entities. So it may look like they're independent creators, but they're really controlled opposition. And if we want to even say in this instance, Fox News and many other media organizations are controlled opposition. So if I paint an example of this, controlled opposition really is a way for if we're using the classical sense of what controlled opposition means. In this instance, it may not be the classical sense, but I'm going to give the classical sense so people conceptually understand the idea. Let's say the government has 5 news channels. They want to report their narrative to the population. Okay, let's say this is an authoritarian regime. We're in Russia, we're in Ukraine, whatever. They need to make sure that one out of those 5 news outlets has a slightly different opinion than the other 4. So that way, when people watch the 5 news outlets, they believe that they're getting different perspectives. They don't actually think that the government is running all 5 of these news outlets. Maybe there's one news outlet that says the name of the country and something news. So, okay, this is very obvious that this is state media. But then you have the other 4, and it doesn't look like the government has any kind of directive with these news outlets. When you do that, you're creating a tilt within the perspective. You're creating a certain range, right? So let's say you have a flashlight, you're in the dark. When you wave the flashlight, you can see more around you. Now, if you have a wider flashlight, a slightly bigger flashlight, you can see a little bit more, okay? Maybe 30, 40 degrees more. That's what governments do to create the perception that people actually have control and choice, to create the perception that people are actually getting different perspectives that are the right perspectives, because they acknowledge most people are not going to sit down, think, meditate, talk to their friends, write down ideas, go back to the ideas, consume all different ranges of, all different angles of information from the left, from the right, from the middle, from far-fetched ideas. Governments understand this from a psychological point of view. Most humans are lazy, inherently lazy. They're going to take the shortcut. They're not going to do that. So when you're able to artificially create that for them, it makes the person innately more satisfied with what they're receiving. And so now the person, they don't need to question anything more. They're content with that situation. There are a lot of people who watch Fox News. They think, okay, all these other news outlets are saying the wrong information, they're propaganda, but I know I know I can go to my Fox News and be satisfied with that information, not realizing that this is also controlled opposition to an extent. So it's not as black and white as that. You'll have a lot of give within these corporations. Of course, they have a lot of give, but they're slightly controlled indirectly or indirectly by other entities in the form of leverage, coercion. I mean, there's a multitude of things of why certain companies will tilt certain ways, right? Sometimes it's very direct. That's just the culture of the company. Sometimes it's not so indirect. Now, what this means is independent creators are more important than ever before. And we are seeing an attack on independent creators. We are seeing an attack on, I mean, there are podcasts that I listen to on major platforms, and they have to self-censor. And I can tell that they're self-censoring because they're saying information and then they stop, and they have to, now they're very good at this. So the average viewer, even with that kind of content, you have intellectual people who are consuming this type of content, 2-3 hour long conversations. The average viewer is not going to understand that this person is strategically being articulate or sophisticated with what they're saying or what they're not saying to avoid a certain subject, because that subject has a lot of scrutiny in terms of censorship. And it wouldn't matter if you're on the left or the right, just the fact that you're bringing up that topic on these platforms goes against certain guidelines. So these creators are, and these creators, some of these creators are just one person speaking like this, or, you know, there's a few guys and they're having a conversation about politics, about finance, about business. A lot of people know who these guys are. People have to be very careful, and they're self-censoring themselves. So when we get to the point where creators are self-censoring because they want to stay on the platform, okay, you got to play within the parameters of the game. The problem is when there are only so many platforms, there needs to be competition. That competition needs to be incentivized by the federal government. If the federal government is not incentivizing competition, these are now monopolies or oligopolies, and they need to be regulated as public utilities. If something is regulated as a public utility, you cannot selectively prosecute people off the platform arbitrarily. There can be general guidelines, and even then, I would say if you're being regulated as a public utility, you are now linked to the First Amendment. I know the government doesn't go that far. Like, for example, cellular companies, energy companies, they're regulated as public utilities, but there is a red flag, a blockade, a threshold at which the government won't protect your First Amendment right, even with those platforms being regulated as a public utility. And that's doing a disservice, because the government is there to either incentivize competition, you let all these companies compete with each other for the consumer, and naturally they have to make the good or product, the good or service better than their competitor to compete. So that's why we're seeing more competition against online platforms who are embracing free speech. And if they're not going to incentivize competition, they create public utilities. Once you're a public utility, that needs to be 100% protected by those absolute rights that you have. Otherwise, we don't truly live in a free and open society. And in fact, we don't truly live in a free and open society. That's the concern. But independent creators are providing something more than legacy media. They're providing not only different information that is being hidden and suppressed, as we saw with the Twitter files, where before Elon Musk took over Twitter would censor news, censor information, so that people could not only read it, but they couldn't disseminate it to other people, right? So you're blocking information that the public has a right to see. And it took people doing FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests, which even then, some information is restricted access for national security. And a lot of these documents are not a matter of national security, yet the government says that they're part of national security, so they can put a clearance on it, which is unconstitutional. We as a public have a right to know information. But what these independent creators are also doing is they're also providing different perspective, even perspectives that they may not necessarily agree with. So that's true authenticity. That's when you know you have a genuine creator. When they're divorcing their personal opinion from objective reality or objective metrics or objective stats. That's when you know you're getting the right perspectives, okay? The right perspectives, as in you could have 5 different perspectives. Of course, not all of them could be right, but there may be some truth in some of them, and you can kind of piece things together. How I would akin it to is when you were a kid, there were drawings that you would get, and they would have dots, and they would have numbers, okay? So let's say there's 50 dots, it'd be numbered 1 through 50. When you follow the dots, you get a picture, and you can color within the lines or whatever. So let's say you connect the dots, you get an elephant. What we want is we want all the dots, and then we have to congregate the dots and order the dots so that we can form the right picture. And the right picture is what the truth is, what the objective truth is, what the right information is. That's what information and perspectives are for. The equation is you take the information, you take the perspectives, you take your critical thinking, you take your discernment, and you create the right picture. It's very hard to say, well, we just need evidence, because a lot of times those who are malicious, they'll hide evidence. So it's very difficult to find evidence for everything. And evidence is required in a court of law. We acknowledge that. But just to understand the truth, the reality of the world, the macro, right? I cover micro topics, but I do expand into the macro, because a lot of people don't expand into the macro. They don't expand into the abstract conceptual ideas of understanding where we are in the timeline of the top-down agenda and how it's progressing, again, to degrade our rights, to degrade free speech, to degrade everything that we hold near and dear here in America. So this is huge. This is important. We need to understand what legacy media is doing, how independent creators are the solution, and we need to protect these independent creators, because these platforms are trying to confine independent creators into a box to a point where they're so sanitized they wouldn't be able to give you the right information. They couldn't even paint different perspectives, because those perspectives could get them kicked off the platform. That's why we have Elon doing some good with Twitter. There's a lot of criticisms for Elon, but he's doing some good with Twitter if they're able to create Twitter into a video platform. We have Rumble, of course, but we need more than this. We need a lot more support and protection for independent creators, because this is how they make their money, and this is how they do their investigative journalism, or they just converse about different ideas, differing ideas, differing opinions that are controversial. Those controversies need to be out in the open as open source, so the public can have discourse. When you remove discourse, you remove thought, you remove idea, you put more power into central authority, because the central authority wants a narrow narrative. They don't want you to think. They don't want you to see what's available to you, whether it's information, whether it's perspective, whether it's access to this independent creator. They want to limit that as much as possible. When they limit that, and you let them limit that, they gain more power, and that power is power over you, right? So really, there should be the individuals having more leverage over big institutions, big government. This is a way to have a deterrent, so there's due process. When the government is so large, like in North Korea, like in China, like in Russia, that the individual is basically minuscule and trivial to the whole system, the government can essentially do whatever they want. A lot of people may say, I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm minding my own business, I go to work, I come home. That's fine. If we don't protect the people who are outcasts, in a sense, who are speaking on behalf of you to preserve your rights, even if you're living a simple life, your simple life can be confined more, and more. And you may not notice it, but when you think back over time, you'll see the direction that we're moving in. And when the change happens, it'll be too late for you to go back and try to help. It'll be too late for you to try to support those other people who are trying to protect your rights. And that's why it's so crucial to understand just how far this information war goes. When you control information, you control knowledge, you control wisdom, you control people's experience. And when you control people's experience, you can change their perception of what reality is. When you can change their perception of reality, you control them, you own them. If people go back to the movie The Matrix, at the beginning part of the movie, we know that Neo was he was in this pod, and the pod was connected, and it was sucking the life force, the energy from Neo. He was inoculated and in this dream world of what he thought was real life. And he couldn't distinguish the difference between that and like the fake world and the real world. And it can metaphorically, but also physically, right? We don't know for a simulation, but physically, there may be a certain point in time, 100 years from now, where that is truly possible. Or maybe it's happening right now, we just don't acknowledge it. But metaphorically, we could be in that position. In fact, there are a lot of people, like people who are watching this, unless you're just a bypasser, people who are watching this acknowledge that there are people out there, many people out there, who work a 9-to-5, who go home. Well, let me put it this way. If you watch this, you know about political corruption. You know about financial corruption. There are a lot of people out there who still put their money in commercial banks, not in a business account, but a personal account. They put their money in a commercial bank where they're getting 0.001% interest. But you and I acknowledge there are high interest savings accounts where people could put their money in there, and I don't want to say it'll match the interest rate level, but you're getting 3, 4, 5% on your money, at least right now. We acknowledge that. That's a type of that's a small level corruption, because you have commercial banks taking advantage of individuals on a personal level. These individuals are unaware, they're not informed or educated enough, or they don't have the energy or effort to seek the information, or maybe even if they did have the information, they don't want to move over for whatever reason. But regardless, the vast amount of people are ignorant to it. They don't realize they can move to another bank that is just as good or better and get money. They can get interest on their money. They don't realize that. So even at a small level, there are people who are blind and ignorant to certain realities of the world. Their perception is skewed. They think they have to go to one of the big four banks. They think this is where their money is safe. It's okay that they're not getting interest. They don't even realize that their dollar is getting eroded every single year due to inflation. So just using that example, we can scale that. There are bigger things in life, in this existence, where people are being duped, where people are ignorant in. And so the goal of these conversations, the goal of going over these topics, is to slowly peel back the layers of what is true, what is false, what we should be paying attention to, and what we should be ignoring, like the distraction news topics that mean nothing to us, when the real problems are much worse and go much deeper, and we have to seek those out so we can find real solutions for those actual problems.